Hi, everyone. You have made it. You've made it to Module 6. You should congratulate yourselves. I know that you've had a lot of information up until this point, and you've done really well. It's a lot to synthesize. I want to break down a little bit more that which we're reading in Chapter 4, and then prepare you for Module 7. Your next module after this, you'll get to synthesize lots of these theories and choose one or two that you can compare and contrast in relation to an ethical dilemma. This will be your opportunity to really review what you've learned and apply a lot of the terminology, as well as get a break from discussions and quizzes and instead write your midterm paper. Just listen here. I'll give you a little bit of highlights from our reading and give you a good guide for the next module, how to prepare for your midterm. So in Chapter 4, we're diving a little bit deeper into ethical egoism, two types of egoism, and social contract theory. And as we're doing that, I want you to be thinking about why we're doing this. During every module, you can remind yourself, what is the point of ethics? What is the point of all of these theories? Okay. So the things that we'll look at: psychological and ethical egoism. Ayn Rand, a particular philosopher who writes and gives examples of how to employ egoism. This idea of the state of nature, as Thomas Hobbes wrote about it. Social contract theory, and the veil of ignorance, which is one form of justice that another more contemporary philosopher writes about. Okay, so this is, like I said, a lot of information, but I'm trying to give it to you in context and also in little bits and pieces. So the first context, the first thing I will say to you, just to put everything kind of in perspective, is the question, what works for us? Why are we doing ethics? Again, we do ethics so that we can answer the question of how shall we live? How is it that we live as human beings with other human beings out in the world? That's why we keep reviewing ethical theories. That's why we think about how do we make decisions about moral dilemmas, questions of right and wrong, or, oh my gosh, I am at an impasse. Which way do I go? That's why we do this. One of the philosophers that we're considering this week, her name is Ayn Rand. She was a Russian philosopher and writer who came to the United States and was very interested in capitalism. In fact, she thought capitalism was the best way to live, the best political system, the best market system, and the best system for the ethics of egoism. In your book in Chapter 4, egoism is broken down into psychological and ethical egoism, further broken down. So with psychological egoism, more specifically, that is the theory that basically all that we do, even if it appears to help others or is altruistic and kind of like some sort of voluntary good action that we do seemingly for others, psychological egoism tells us even that which we think is good for others ultimately benefits us. You don't have to agree with that, but some people would say, oh, if I'm a psychological egoist, even saving my own child, I'm benefiting myself because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't, let's say, save my child from a car crashing into her or a train running over her. Ethical egoism even further directs us to just always choose those things that ultimately benefit us. And this philosopher, who I just mentioned, Ayn Rand, really takes that egoism theory to a new level and says, ultimately, again, in a capitalistic society, this is where we are allowed to do what we need to for ourselves, to earn as much as we can. I mean, she does not advocate harming others, but she advocates doing what is in our own best interest economically. And she feels the United States as a capitalistic society is the best place for us to do that. You might be able to watch a little video on her and read a paper if you choose to write about egoism for your for your midterm. And then next, other things to think about. State of nature. This philosopher, Thomas Hobbes, who's mentioned in your book, was thinking about the world and how we came to be a cooperative type of people, right? How did humans start developing ethics? In the very beginning, before there were rules and governments, we might have all lived in this place called the state of nature, which would be really awful if you think about it. In a state of nature, there were no governments, there were no social contracts. People had to fend for themselves. They had every right to fend for themselves, but it was probably a really brutal society. We have nothing like that now. But Hobbes imagined this in order to then think about how and why we make social contracts. And then another philosopher who's more contemporary, you may have heard of before, John Rawls, talks about that place to which we've gotten in society where, we're not living in a state of nature. It's probably a very long time ago that we did, or a very, very short time that we did. But now that we're in a society where we have to have rules and governments, and we have to abide by certain social agreements, he wants us to think about what would be the fairest way to live. And one of his concepts, also mentioned in your book, is called the veil of ignorance. For Rawls, he says the best justice would occur if we all lived or came at trying to make agreements from behind this imaginary veil of ignorance. So think of it like you have a big cloth around your eyes and you can't see. Everyone you come into contact with would be considered your equal. You wouldn't know if they're taller than you, shorter than you, stronger than you, weaker than you. And Rawls feels like this veil of ignorance is the best way to start in terms of creating equity. So we'll see if these sorts of terms help you in your quest for deciding which ethical theories work for you best. I just wanted to give you those highlights and have you be thinking about those terms. I've also put up some little avatars here just as a reminder of the numbers of ethical frameworks we've talked about so far. And I will pause here so you can look at those. Egoism, cultural relativism, ethical subjectivism, theories of justice, virtue ethics that we talked about in the last module, as well as natural law theory, divine command theory, and theories of compassion, such as the Dalai Lama writes about. So all of these are fair game. I won't have you write papers on every single one, but as a review, this is what we've learned so far. So thanks for being here, and I hope that this module goes well. I am around for questions once you get to module 7 and you start writing your papers. Have a great week.